Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Kof Yod Dalid. Yesterday we saw this baraita that was quoted before Rav Nachman that taught Kederech shemisadirin barachin kach misadirin beba'al chov. Just like we make an arrangement, meaning a bankruptcy protection arrangement, regarding in the area of arachin, so too we also do it for someone, a borrower that owes money. Let's talk about where this is from, because we're going to delve more into this today. So in Vayikra chapter 27, it talks about the laws of arachin. That means if someone donates their value, ki'afli neder be'erkecha nefashot laHashem. He donates, I'm going to donate my value, or you can also donate someone else's value. And then it doesn't go by their market value. That's a different type of donation. You can donate anything to a hekdesh. You can donate your house. You can donate your animal, your cup, anything, and that would be the value of it. And you can also donate yourself, your own value as bedek habayit. That goes to the general treasury, and that if you do it in that way, then it would be the actual market value. If it's a person, it would be the market value on the slave market. But here, this is not talking about that. This is the special law of arachin, where it goes by a fixed sum, depending on person's age and gender. The Torah gives the various amounts of how much one would have to pay. And then at the end of that very paragraph says, "V'imachu me'arkecha be'amidot lifnei hakohen ve'erichoto hakohen al pi asher tasig yad hanoder yarichenu hakohen." If the person who donates cannot afford this evaluation, if he donated himself and he's this age and he cannot afford that amount, then he will stand before the kohen, and the kohen will do an assessment of what he can afford, and he'll pay that, and he is exempt from the rest. Okay, so this is the main source for making an arrangement. The arrangement that we saw in yesterday was we make sure to give him 2 beds, blanket, so on, basic necessities, tools that he needs for food, and so on. Okay, so that's where we're holding, and now we have a question. Iba Eliyahu, mahu sheyasaderu beba'al chob. We know for sure, everyone agrees, the Torah says that you make a sidur for arachin, you make a special arrangement for someone that donates their value. However, the question is halacha like that baraita that we just said? Do we make such bankruptcy protection also for a borrower? Mi gamar micha marachin o la. Do we make a gezerah shava? It says the word mach. We just saw it here. V'im mach hu me'arkecha. If he's too poor, then he doesn't pay. And it says the word mach also in Vayikra 25 regarding giving a loan to a poor person and not charging interest. And so therefore, should we make a gezerah shava and compare the two, and thereby have bankruptcy protection also for a borrower, or do we not make this gezerah shava, and this sidur bankruptcy protection is only given to someone who donates erech, but not for other borrowers? Tashema deshalach rabin be'igarte davar ze sha'alti l'chol rabotai ve'lo amru li davar. Come and learn about a letter that Ravin, who lived in Eretz Israel, sent to Bavel. And in the letter, he reports that he asked this very question: whether we apply bankruptcy protection from arachin, do we make a gezerah shava and also apply it to a borrower? I asked this to all of my teachers, and they did not have a response for me. Beram kachayta she'ela haomer hare alai maneh lebedek habayit mahu sheyesadiru. However, there was a different question that was asked and that they did answer, and we can derive an answer to our question from what they answered to that question. Incidentally, it's very interesting that they sent this in a letter, because this may be some of the first writing down of the oral law. We know that Ravin and others, they lived in Eretz Israel, they were nechut ta'eh. They would often travel to Bavel, and they would bring with them oral traditions that they heard. And so at this point, almost all of oral law was still oral, was still memorized. But in certain instances like this, they would write it down in a letter if he wasn't traveling, and they might have kept these letters, and this probably is the first examples of the oral law being written. Okay, so here is the answer. Here's the question that they did ask. If someone donates 100 dinar for bedek habayit, for the general temple maintenance, this is not arachin. This is not official arachin where you say I'm going to donate my value, my erech. But this is just a general donation, and he can't afford it. Do we make an arrangement with him to say, listen, you have this much, pay that much, you can keep your beds, we'll deduct this amount, and you only pay what you can afford, and we have an arrangement. Does that apply? The Torah says it applies to arachin. Does it also apply to bedek habayit if someone just makes a donation? And we're going to see the answer is a machloket. Rabbi Yaakov mishmeh derapad. רבי ירמיה משמד אלפה אמרי קו החומר מבעל חוב מה בעל חוב שמחזירין אין מסדרין הקדש שאין מחזירין אין נודין שאין מסדרין. So Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah say we can learn the answer to this question from a kav hachomer, from a borrower. Just like a borrower is just a regular person who just borrows money from his friend and cannot afford to pay. And regarding a borrower, if we have to take collateral from him, we return the collateral. Like if we take his pajamas, we give back his pajamas every night. So you have the pajama law applies to a regular borrower, and yet we do not make bankruptcy arrangements for a borrower. So if so, then hekdesh, donating money to bedek habayit, where there's no returning pajama law, there's no protection for that. The guy, if he donates 100 dinar, and then we take away his pajamas and everything, and we don't return it to him, all the more so that we will not make bankruptcy arrangement. Okay, from the basis of this kav hachomer, the assumption that for a borrower we do not have bankruptcy arrangement, that was the basis of their kav hachomer, we can learn an answer to the original question that, at least according to Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah, there is no bankruptcy protection for a borrower, and from there we learn also not for someone who donates bedek habayit. So that would be an answer to the question. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And since he says neder and erkecha means arachin, and neder means any other vow that one donates 100 dinar to the Bet HaMikdash, or any other vow. So since these two words are back to back, we can learn that just like regarding arachin, we make bankruptcy arrangement, so too anything that you make hekdesh, you do make a bankruptcy arrangement. So if someone says, I want to donate my house, I want to donate $1 million, and then he doesn't have it, so there is protection, and we reduce the value and allow him to keep his major necessities. All right, so we do see here that there is a machloket regarding bedek habayit, but the assumption of the kav hachomer of Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Yaakov is that there is no bankruptcy protection for a regular borrower. Okay, now that Rabbi Yochanan quoted this pasuk neder be'erkecha, and learned from here that we do have bankruptcy protection for bedek habayit donation. And Rabbi Yaakov disagrees. We say ve'idach. What is Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah going to do with this pasuk neder be'erkecha? And the answer is ahul nidon bichbodo hu de'ata marachi nidon bichbodo afekdesh nidon bichbodo. This is to teach us that someone who donates bichbodo according to his significance, to the significance of what he donates. Other versions say bichbedo, for his liver. Okay, there's a law regarding arachin. If someone says, instead of saying I donate my value, he says I donate my arm, just his arm. In that case, he only has to pay the value of his arm because he didn't donate the value of his entire body. And the arm is not necessary for life. A person could live without an arm. However, if someone says, I donate my liver, I donate my heart, he donates a vital organ, so that could work either with bichvoda, something significant, or kevedo, which would mean liver. So it would end up with the same law. If you donate a vital organ, then since you can't live without that organ, that's the same as donating your entire body, and you have to pay the valuation of your entire body. And so, Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yirmiyah say, we learn from this, neder and erkecha, a gezerash, a juxtaposition, a hekesh, to say, just like regarding arachin, if one donates his heart or his liver, as arachin, then he has to pay the erech value of his entire body. So too, if he donates his body as bedek habayit, but he donates just his heart, he still has to pay for the value of his entire body. In the second case, if it's just hekdesh, it would be on the slave market. How much he is worth. Whereas if he donates only his arm, then you would evaluate how much is he worth as a slave with his arm versus without his arm, and then he would only have to pay that much. So that's what Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Mesia do with that pasuk. Now, once we brought this kav hachomed over here, we can rearrange the kav hachomed and learn some other things also. Why don't we learn that a Baal Chov, a regular borrower, gets bankruptcy protection? We can learn that kav hachomed from arachin as follows: Ma'arachin she'en machzirin mesadirin, Baal Chov she'machzirin en odin she'mesadirin. If regarding erech evaluation, where if someone donates his own value, and then the temple treasury comes and takes his pajamas, they don't have to return his pajamas, and yet that guy gets bankruptcy protection. Well, then a borrower who gets his pajamas returned, so he has nighttime protection of returning things that he needs, or daytime if they took his tools and they return that to him. So all the more so that he should get bankruptcy protection. And so now we can learn a kav hachomed that all borrowers should get bankruptcy protection. There's a pasuk that breaks this kav hachomed, because the pasuk says regarding someone who donates arachin, if he is poor and cannot afford the erech that he made, then that person, the kohen, will deduct and give him bankruptcy protection. But it says who, that extra word comes to teach us, we only give protection for him, but not for anybody else, not for a regular borrower. So according to that, there is no kav hachomed, and a regular borrower does not get bankruptcy protection. V'idach, but now we ask, according to the other opinion, the braita that we started with today, that says we do learn from arachin to regular borrower, and there is bankruptcy protection. What are they going to do with this pasuk and this word hu, a limiting word? Hi, we learn from there that in order to get bankruptcy protection for in the case of arachin, he has to be poor from the beginning to the end, from the time that he made the erech vow, I donate my value, and he's poor, and all the way until the time that the kohen comes and he evaluates him, he stands before the kohen, he has to still be poor. Only then will the kohen deduct from what he has to pay and give him protection. But if he's poor at the time that he makes the donation, but then he wins the lottery, becomes rich, and then he goes before the kohen says, oh, but now you're rich, now you have to pay the full amount of your erech value. And so that's what we learn. Who, the word who means he, only if he is poor the entire time. So we need the word hu for the law of arachin in and of itself, and it does not teach us any limitation on the law of a regular borrower, and therefore that opinion would hold this kav hachomed to be valid. Okay, now another variation of this kav hachomed will let us learn that that regarding hekdesh, if I donate something to the Beit HaMikdash and I can't afford it and they take my pajamas, that they have to give me my pajamas back every day, I could learn that kav hachomed from a borrower. Ma Baal Chov she'mesadirin machzirin, hekdesh she'mesadirin enodin she'machzirin. Regarding a borrower where we do not make an arrangement for bankruptcy, we're following that opinion. Yet the Torah says you have to give him back his pajamas. Then regarding hekdesh, where we do make an arrangement, if he cannot pay, then all the more so you should give him back his pajamas if he donated his value and he can't pay, then he should get that back. Amar kera v'shachav besalmato uberacheka yasa hekdesh she'en sarich beracha. No, the pasuk says that regarding a borrower, give him back his pajamas so he can sleep with his clothing, and he will bless you. value. That makes sense if the person giving back the pajamas is someone that needs blessing. So that'll be a regular borrower and a regular lender. So you give back the borrower his pajamas, he blesses the lender. That's very good. But that wouldn't make sense for Hekdesh, right? Hashem doesn't need our blessings. The Bet HaMikdash itself doesn't need our blessings, and therefore there's no need to apply this pasuk to Hekdesh, that if someone donates to the Bet HaMikdash and they can't afford it and they give their pajamas, so what? Give it back to them so that the poor person will bless Hekdesh? It does not. Hashem doesn't require blessing. But then we ask about that. Velo v'haketiv achalta v'sabata uberachta begomed. Pasuk says that if when you eat and you're satisfied, you should bless Hashem who provided for you the food. So actually, we always bless Hashem. All of our prayers are Baruch Atah, blessing Hashem, and this is the source. This is a deoraita law of Birkat Hamazon. So it does make sense to say uberacheka, that if a poor person donates and he can't afford and he gets his pajamas back, he will bless Hashem. So it's fine to say that. Ela amar kera ulcha tiye tzedakah, misha sarich tzedakah yasa hekdesh she'en sarich tzedakah. No, we can learn the exclusion from the rest of the pasuk, that it will be considered tzedakah, righteousness, charity for you. If you give back the poor person who borrowed money his pajamas, it will be considered for you tzedakah. You'll get righteousness, you'll have merit. So that's a human being who needs it. But Hekdesh, they don't need the merit of charity, and therefore it doesn't make sense to require the Bet HaMikdash to give back the someone's pajamas. So that is the bottom line conclusion. And the halacha l'maaseh is that regarding a borrower, we follow the opinion that not only for arachin, but we do make a connection between arachin and a regular borrower, and a regular borrower who cannot afford to pay, he does get to keep his basic necessities and food and tools. This halacha is confirmed also in the following very interesting story. Ashkeche Rabba bar Abu Eliyahu deka'e bebet hakebarot shel nochrim. Rabba bar Abu was walking around one day and he found Eliyahu Hanabi, who was standing in a graveyard of Gentiles. Amar le, mahu sheyisaderu b'ba'al chob. He says, oh Eliyahu, I'm so glad I bumped into you here because I have a question. What is the halacha? Do we make bankruptcy arrangements for a borrower? Amar le gamar. Remember, none of the rabbis knew the answer, so maybe Eliyahu Nabi knows. Amar le gamar micha me'arachin. Gabe arachin ketiv imach hu me'arkecha. Gabe ba'al chob ketiv ki yamuch achicha. And Eliyahu had the answer. He says, yes, we do, because we learn a gezerah shava of poor and poor. It says regarding arachin, if a person is poor and he can't pay, that the Kohen will evaluate him and make an arrangement. And so too, it says the same word, ki yamuch. If someone is poor, you have to give them a loan. And so therefore, we learn that you make an arrangement for a poor person as well. Okay, good. So now we have the answer. Now, while he's there, minayin la'arum shelo yitrom tichtib velo yir'eh becha advat davar. Rabba bar Abu asks Eliyahu, what's the source that one is not permitted to separate terumah of his produce if he is not wearing clothing? And the answer is because the pasuk says regarding an army encampment, vaya machanecha kadosh, and this is the context is that if a soldier has to relieve himself, he has to go outside and make a hole and cover up his excrement because this is a holy area and you should not see an unseemly thing. So from there we learn that in general, whenever there's something holy, and that includes the beracha that one says before separating terumah, you can't say the beracha without clothes on, and therefore that's the source. Amar le, lav kohen humor. Now Rabba bar Avu says, what exactly are you doing in a cemetery? Right? Isn't Eliyahu a kohen? So how can he be in the cemetery? And so the Navi says, have you never learned teharot, the subject of purity and impurity laws? The Tanya, there's a braita that we learn there. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, ki brehen shenochrim en metami'in, shenemar v'aten soni son mar'iti adam atem keruim adam ve'en nochrim keruim adam. But Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says in a braita that the graves of non-Jews do not cause impurity, because the pasuk in Yechezkel says, "You, Bnei Israel, are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture. You are called Adam." Now it says regarding the laws of impurity, Adam ki yamut be'ohel. If a person, Adam, dies in a tent, everything in the tent becomes tameh. So you, only Bnei Israel, are called Adam for the purpose of this halacha, and non-Jews are not called Adam, and therefore corpse of a non-Jew does not impart tum'ah through tent impurity. If you're walking in a cemetery, you're not bumping into or moving corpses, but rather you're hovering over them. So the only problem that could be there is causing a tent, is creating a tent, and there's no problem of tent impurity in a non-Jewish cemetery. So that's Eliyahu Nabi says, yeah, of course, this is true, right? Have you never learned the Seder Taharot? Then you should know this. Amar le bar ba'a la masina b'shita masina, and Abba bar Avu says, how can I know all that? Even the 4 main sedarim that they are generally studied, even that I'm not proficient as I should be. And the other 2, all 6, you think I'm going to be so proficient that I know everything? Taharot was not so relevant and was not learned all that much, and that's why we actually have no Talmud, not Yerushalmi and not Bavli, for most of Masechet Teharot. We do have for Masechet Nida, because Nida is relevant, but for the rest of it, not. And that's because the sages did not learn that as much. And so the Baba Rabu says, I can barely learn 4 Sedarim, and Masechet Teharot, I don't really know it. Amar le ve'amai. So the Navi says, why not? Why don't you go and study it? Amar le dechikali milita. Because my livelihood is pressing. I have to spend a lot of time at work. It's very difficult for me to make ends meet. Dabre v'aile legan eden. So Eliyahu says, Nabi says, I've got you covered. Eliyahu brings Rabba bar Avu into Gan Eden alive, walking around. Amale peshot gelimach sefe shekol mehani tarfe sefa shekal. So Eliyahu Navi says, take off your cloak, put some leaves in it, right, and take these leaves back with you. These are very valuable. And so Rabba bar Avu says, okay, and he's gathering up the leaves. Kevan nafik he's walking out of Gan Eden with them, and he hears a voice that says, Man ka'achir le'almeh kerabba bar Avu. Who takes away his world to come, his reward, like Rabba bar Avu. Gan Eden, literally, the world to come, that's the reward that's for there. And so if you're going to take that and bring it down to this world, then you are subtracting from your retirement account, and this is not going to be good in the future. Nefas shadanhu. Rabba bar Avu heard that. He says, no, not me, forget about it. And he threw out all the leaves from his cloak, and he left with nothing. But even though he brought his cloak back down to earth, and the cloak, just by being there, touching the leaves, absorbed such a beautiful smell. Zabene betresar alfe dinare palginu lechatan vate. He was able to sell that cloak for 12,000 dinar, but Rabba bar Avu did not want to benefit from it himself, and so he split the proceeds among his sons-in-law. Next, we're going to see a series of 3 baraitot that are unclear in their formulation, and the Amoraim will clarify what they mean. Here's the first, Tenor Banan. V'im ish ani hu lo tishkab ba'avoto, ha'ashir shechev. The pasuk says, if the borrower is a poor person, then do not keep his collateral overnight and sleep with it. Rather, you have to return it to him, because that's his pajamas and he needs to sleep with it, and then you can come get it back in the morning. So it says only if he is poor, but if he is rich, then he can sleep. That's the end of the Braita. But it's not so clear. What does it mean? My ka'amar, amar of Sheshat, hachi ka'amar. V'im ish anihu lo tishka v'avoto etzlecha, ha'ashir shechev v'avoto etzlecha. This is what it means. If the borrower is a poor person, then you, the lender, should not sleep while you have his collateral, because he needs it to sleep with. But if the borrower is a rich person, then you, the lender, can keep his pajamas at night and keep keep it with you overnight because he's rich and he will have other clothing to wear at night. And so that makes sense. Just the pronouns here, imishanihu lotishkab, if he is, at first we thought it meant if he is poor, then he should not, the poor person, should not sleep with his collateral. No, you have to give it back to him so he can sleep. And who's the rich person? Right? So now we clarified that it's all talking about the borrower. The borrower, if he's poor, you have to give it back to him so that the borrower can sleep with his pajamas, and you, the lender, should not sleep with his pajamas. Whereas if the borrower is rich, then you don't have to give it back to him. Second baraita, tenor banan. Hamavet chavero eno rashay lemashkeno, ve'no chayav lachazir lo, ve'ober bechol hashemot halalu. My kamar. Look at this baraita. Someone who lends money to someone else is not permitted to take collateral from him. Right? Yeah, as we said before, you can't just go and barge in and take collateral. It's not up to you. You have to go to Bet Din and so on. And you don't have to return it to him. This seems like a contradiction. You can't take collateral. That means if you did, then you don't have to return it to him, and you violate all of the pisukim of all the pisukim that we mentioned. You have to return to him at night until the sun comes, and so on. So what does this mean? You can't take it, you have to return it, you violate. When do you violate? If you don't return it, if you took it in the first place. We don't understand this. Amar Rav Sheshat, Hachika Amar, Hamavet chavero eno rashay lemashkeno, v'im mishkeno chayav lachazir lo, ve'over bechol hashemot halalu asefa. Rav Sheshat explains, you have this word, ve'eno chayav, is a problem. You have to change it. So here's what it means. Someone who lends money to his friend is not allowed to take collateral. And if he did take collateral illegally, then he has to return it. And if this he violates, that's talking about the sefa. If you did take it, and until you return it, you violate all of those prohibitions of taking something, going into his house, taking something, taking his pajamas, not returning them, all of those. So that makes it clear. That's one interpretation. Rava Amar Hachika Amar Hamavet chavero eno rashay lemashkeno v'mishkeno chayav lachazir lo. B'medrim amorim shemishkeno shelo b'shat halva'ato aval mishkeno b'shat halva'ato eno chayav lachazir lo ve'over bechol hashemot halalu aresha. So Rava finds a different interpretation where he can keep the eno, that you don't have to return it. So there is a case where you have to return it and a case that you don't have to. As follows. Someone who lends money is not to his friend is not allowed to just go and take collateral from him. And if he did take collateral illegally, he has to return it. When is that true that he has to return it and cannot take collateral? Only if he takes that collateral not during the time of the loan, but afterwards. He is coming later and trying to collect the loan, and he goes in and takes it. No, that's when he's not allowed to take it, and if he takes it, he cannot keep it, he has to return it. However, if this was collateral that he was given to him at the time of the loan, meaning right at the time that they made the loan in the first place, the lender says, okay, here, I'm going to give you $1,000, I'd like a collateral, and the borrower says, okay, here's my watch, and he gives him the collateral. So since he gave it willingly up front, right at the beginning of the loan, then that's permitted, and the lender can keep it. He does not have to return it, not even in the day, not at night. He can keep it the whole time because it was given to him willingly right there at the beginning up front. And now this phrase that he will violate all of the various prohibitions, that's going on the resha. That's going on the case where after the loan was already given, and now he's coming to collect, and he goes and if he goes and seizes these assets illegally, then he violates those laws. He has to go to court, and the court can get involved, and the court can go and get a collateral for him. And if he has that collateral, he has to return it. All that applies to the collection of the loan. So the last line of the baraita is going up there on the beginning of it. Okay, and next baraita that needs clarification. Tane Rav Shizvi kamed Rava ad bo hashemesh teshivenu lo zo kesut laila hashev tashiv lo et haavot ke bo hashemesh zo kesut yom amar le dimama belelia lamali udelelia bimama lamali. Rav Shizvi quotes the following baraita to Rava. It quotes two pisukim, one from Shemot, one from Devarim. Now in Peshat, both of these pisukim sound like they're saying the same thing. One says ad bo hashemesh, until the sun comes. It sounds like sunset. you have to return the garment to him. The other one says ke bo hashemesh, so slightly different, but they seem to both mean sunset. And if you look at the context, they're talking about night garments, that you have to return the night garment at sunset so that the person can wear it. Okay, that seems to be the Peshat. However, the Midrash is saying, well, they must be talking about different things, because otherwise, why would we need two Pisukim? And therefore, this Baraita is going to interpret Ad bo hashemesh to mean sunrise, something like the entire time that the sun has set, right, until the end of the setting of the sun. So that means sunrise. Okay, so here's the Braita. Ad bo hashemesh, something about sunrise. Sunrise, you should return it to him. And that is a night garment, which doesn't make sense, because why would you return a night garment at sunrise? And the other pasuk in Devarim that says sunset, return his garment, that is a daytime garment. So return it to him at sunset, which also doesn't make sense, because why would he need his daytime garment at night? And so that's the challenge of Rava. That doesn't make sense. The day garment, what does a poor person need the day garment at night? And why does we need night garment during the day? It doesn't make sense. So Rav Shizbi says, so is this a false baraita? Should I erase it? It's just wrong. Rava says, no, don't erase it. If it's a baraita, it must be based on some good oral tradition. We just have to understand it better. Ad bo hashemesh teshibenu lo zo kesut yom shenitena lachavol balayla. The one that's talking about sunrise, at sunrise you should return it to him. That is a daytime garment that you can keep at night. That's what it meant when it says zo kesut laila. It's just missing words. It's actually kesut yom, but the lender can keep it at night. And the other pasuk, Hashem teshib lo et ha'avot kebo hashemesh zo kesut laila shenitena lachavol bayom, that you should return it to him at sunset. This is a night garment that the borrower needs at night, that the lender can hold as collateral during the day. And so once we reinterpret the words that way, then we can keep this baraita, and it teaches us that distinction between a daytime and nighttime garment. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.